Welcome to the Live by Heart Today Show 92. This is a show designed to help you navigate change, uncertainty, and the world we found ourselves in. We'll talk a little bit about science. We'll talk a little bit about how our body works, a little bit about intuition, and we talk a lot about transformation.
Live by Heart Today is brought to you by
wearehistorically.com. Conscious Human Apparel.
Learn to play jazz piano like a pro, by a pro, with Jazz Piano Pro Essentials at jazzpianopro.com.
Hello, I'm Dawn Spiegelberg, medical intuitive and coherence coach. This show is in our pilgrimage series. Today's theme is knowing. And with me for our heart to heart is my guest, Peter Lucas, fitness and wellness specialist and community leader. Welcome back, Peter. It's great to have you on another show. Last show, we were talking about fire and water and roles of men and women and flow. And I'm excited to talk with you again this week about sort of the same thing. But in particular, I'd love your take on why we don't know ourselves that well. Why is it that we can have relationships and have struggle in relationships and conflict and not realize that conflict is arising because of something that I want, something that I desire, that I don't feel I'm getting, but I'm not necessarily going about getting it in a way that the other person easily knows or understands about it. I'd love to hear your take on that.
Ooh, well, the
Welcome
first
back.
thing, no, thanks for having me, Don. I'm always excited to go on the show. It's a great question. And to me, in terms of like why we're naturally ingrained with why we don't know who we are, is because of a few different things. You know, I think the first starting point is we have to look at this universe, right? We have to look at the essence of as above, so below. And when
Explain that. Will you explain that? Not everyone is familiar with that phrase.
Yeah. So it's the essence of the macro and the micro. This grand scale of celestial bodies and the laws of nature and this physicality really do play on the small scale. Us, we are the representations of them. And one example of this would be, when you really start to live out your truth, when you do discover who you are, you begin to operate more like the celestial body you are as this light body. You become to operate like a star. Things and people and opportunities start to gravitate towards you. It's not as much going out into the world and getting bombarded by crazy chaos. It's you start to really be the lead and everything else starts to come around you and your intentions. So there's a gravitational shift that applies, law of attraction, law of inertia, all these different things play a role. And a more applicable understanding for people that maybe not know who they are is the sense of what arises when we go through life's roller coaster of personhood. We have this opportunity to look at the law of inertia at play, where if we don't escape a conditioning, if we don't choose to learn a lesson from a past experience, life will give us this merry-go-round opportunity to learn the lesson so we can really exit it. And it operates kind of like that gas flame where it's just going to keep cranking up the heat every time until you move your hand. So we can see that that's just the one basic law of inertia that we can all apply to, is we're all in this process of awakening and unfolding. There's just some people who are more conscious about it and not. And
so I just have to jump in and say your comment about the merry-go-round, that is so right on. And I've been trying to describe this concept to people where the kind of thing that irritates you is the kind of thing that's going to arise and keep coming back. And you described it like a merry-go-round, which is beautiful. I'm going to take that from you.
Of course.
And I've been trying to describe it for people as the level that you're on and your focus. So if something irritates you, so when I grew up in the central New York, there was frequently snow. And if snow got on the floor and melted and I walked through it, then my socks would get wet. And so my feet would be so cold. So I didn't like, wet floors. I didn't like snow on the floor.
Yeah.
And it would happen over and over and over again. And my feet were really, really cold. And what I realized was if I would just let go of the wet floor, let go, it change my socks if they got wet, wipe up the floor, then it
Yeah.
wasn't an irritant anymore.
Yeah.
And then I outgrew it.
Yeah.
I got beyond it. But it
Yeah.
kept coming up over and over, especially in winter,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
My socks are wet again. This is terrible. Well, how terrible really is wet socks? It's really not that terrible. But I was making such a big deal out of it that it became a terrible experience for me. So I love that. It kept coming around again and again, just like a merry-go-round.
Yeah. And it's that aspect of the gas stove, because as life is always trying to bring us to this point of realization, it's going to turn up the heat. And as life goes, it's that, again, like the micro or the macro to the micro, it's that law of inertia comes into play, because that object in motion is going to stay in motion unless that equal or greater force acts upon it. So what's going to happen? You're going to keep spinning that merry-go-round in this 0G force environment, and it's just going to go faster and faster. And the more you invest yourself in that, I guess you would say, bad habit or conditioning, the more, I guess you would say, force that it's going to take for you to stop it, to get out of it. But
and your focus.
Exactly. And
what you focus on grows.
Yes. And then it becomes that fixation. Then you begin to utilize your powers of manifestation and creation for the toxic ways. You're creating your perpetual bondage versus creating opportunities for your liberation. And, to bring it into the sense of the question, it's like, why don't people know who they are?
Yeah.
It brings it back to the sense of, so many people are so caught up in the play that they don't actually give themselves the time to reactivate that childlike curiosity and start asking questions and looking at the subtleties. If I could really sum it in one word, I would say people don't know who they are because they assume they know who they are. Or so assumption would probably be like the word that just echoes through, because we naturally overlook the power and depth of what it really means to live a human experience. Like, we talk hours, time skip. We both experienced that as hosts, where it's like, oh, that went by like 20 minutes. And how long has it been? 3 hours. Oh my gosh, I got to go. Like, that's one aspect. Time is illusory. Time is just a concept. You have the sense of, when you go to sleep every night, you willingly and lovingly and almost eagerly, for some people, forget who you are. You choose to let down the character you are every night. And it's those types of things, the connections that we have in life, where when you just resonate with someone so strongly, it's just like, oh my gosh, I feel like I've known you forever. I feel like this is a deeper bond than I've had with people I've known my entire life. And then there's even the examples of the divine timing. Like, things couldn't be more perfect for things to line up like this. We have to look at the sense that magic is always around us, but we assume it's not. We assume we know. And in the sense of, carrying over from the previous episode, you can't really get in this search unless you've really chosen to harmonize your own energies, to really correct your wrongs, to really learn and grow. And that takes a certain level of curiosity and courage that most people don't have nowadays. They're caught up more in the fear and the, I guess you would say, submissiveness of just being told and taught what to do and think.
Yes.
So it's there's a lot of reasonings why, but I would say that the main essence, to answer your question, is just basic assumption. People don't know who they are, or what we are, or what life is, because we assume we already know it. And when you think you know everything, you can never receive any new information. It's like, if your cup is filled with just ignorance, you can never fill it up with the nectar of the divine, because you're like, no, I want this, I need this. And it's like, no, pour it out. You've just been collecting your spit, your drool. Like, life is trying to give you the real juicy stuff, but we hold ourselves back. But stemming from, again, the episode previously, is so many people are disconnected from themselves. They're really just holding on to a thought, like, and a collection of emotional conditionings and mental patterns that aren't theirs. So, but if you assume that's you, kind of game over.
And you're very right about that. And I'd like to point out too that we aren't taught the multiplicity of who we are. So we see with our eyes, we hear with our ears, we taste, we smell, we feel, and everything is very sensory. And all of that is feeding the brain, feeding the mind.
Exactly.
But we're more than just our body and our mind.
Mm-hmm.
We are spiritual. We have a heart, just like people would say the brain isn't just an organ that works with differentiating stimulus from the body. The heart isn't just an organ that pumps blood. The brain holds our mind, and we can conceive of an entire round earth or even a flat earth, or we can conceive of people in Russia and people in Ukraine, even though we've never been there, right?
Yeah.
So that's the power of the mind. And the heart has its own power. We can love, we can show compassion for people we don't know. We can show compassion for someone who isn't considered an enemy or a nemesis. And so I really believe that because we're so focused on what's happening in the physical world, and we're taught this is a ball, this is a hairband, this is a drinking glass, we're not taught the magic, like you said, the spiritual, the more vertical. We're all stuck in the horizontal interactions.
Yeah.
And I love the work that you're doing in creating a men's group. You talked about that last program, where you are teaching men how to be vertical and male and vertical, not just the infant aspects of males that are all sensory based.
Yeah.
So thank you for that work, because we need to know ourselves.
Yeah.
And when we know ourselves, then we can get to know other people and be more magnanimous, be more compassionate, be more ourselves.
Yeah. And the beauty of the event too, even just from like the name and the conception of the name itself, is, love alliteration. So for me, it was one of those things where you have to look at what it really takes to take that next step as, a divine masculine or a divine feminine. And it boils back down to really how the show started. And the first question is like, why people don't know who they are.
Yeah.
And we have to look at that fundamental origin of our universe. How does the creator come to know itself without some type of other, without some type of comparison? How do you distinguish between something if there's only one thing?
Yeah.
So it's this whole human experience of boom, manifestation. Now we have an entire universe to figure it out, and we're all unique windows of that divine awareness that is source, creator, God, whatever people would like to call it. But it's that eternal and universal consciousness that is every being and every person. So we can never do it by ourselves fully. We may be able to take those questions and come to the fulfillment and realize the truth, the capital T, by ourselves. But in that journey takes others.
Yes.
That journey takes the experiences and perspectives of others. And that's kind of the secret life hack behind this universe is like, yeah, you come into this experience alone, you exit it alone in your birth and the death. But the life that you live is eternal. And when you really come to understand yourself beyond the physical, beyond the assumptions that we have about this reality, you come to realize that, wow, I am a lot more than just this body. I am a lot more than this. And I can come to experience that in a group setting where other people are seeing it too. And they're seeing it from a different angle. And I like the way they phrase that. I like the way they phrase that. It helps me have those aha moments and those revelatory thoughts that just come through with the dots just connect. And that's the magic that we can experience when we really do just put ourselves out there and try to answer the question, because I don't really see that there is a full answer to figuring out who we are. I don't think we can ever actually figure it out, but we can get super close, because what we get is the aroma of our beingness. We see the light of what we're shining, but we're the star itself. We can see the shadows that it casts as well. And that's another thing to kind of look at. So it just comes back to the sense of, in order for us to really level up on the grand scale, we have to break our assumptions. And what's one of the most powerful exercises in that? And it's sharing.
Yeah.
When you don't assume things about other people and you hear their experiences, it breaks your preconception you had of them. Because again, the beingness is always like assumptive. We're just going to push all the things we think we know out there and live and create our reality based on that imaginary thought. And when you have that firsthand experience where it's just like, no, this is like a white dude that's, like 20 years older than you, that is experiencing something that you lived through or you're living through. This is another person, maybe an Asian background, and they're like 30 years older than you. And they're able to share you some words of wisdom that are going to help you through something that is happening right now in the moment, where it's just, I guess that's probably the most powerful word behind this aspect of assumption is what destroys assumption and where you can really take that path to figure out who you are is humility.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to realize we don't know everything.
Mm-hmm.
We really don't know anything. And if you can accept that first, then the real journey of truth, finding can begin, because we are so small in this universe to assume that what we're taught and what history has even been said is the real truth, and all these different things of the institutions and the corruption of man, And speaking on the stuff in the last episode, the immature expressions that have been mainstream or building blocks of our culture, we have to look at it in the sense where we as people have to grow up and be accountable and realize that what we're doing doesn't work. What we've been doing doesn't work. And only through realizing what we're not and what doesn't work can we come to discover who we are, So that's kind of, again, that process, like the real birthing point of ending the assumption begins when you humble yourself by being accountable and taking the reins. So yeah, lots of stuff.
I realized something, because you talked about in the last show emptying the cup, and if your own cup is full of your own spit, then you don't get to taste the juice of life. And that's the definition of humility. It's emptying your cup. It's not being so full of yourself that there's no more room in your cup for anything or anyone else.
Yeah.
So emptying your cup is humility, so that you can interact, you can enjoy other people, you can experience them for who they are. And you mentioned people are born alone and people die alone, but between birth and death, there's a lot of interactions that are necessary. And that's just like nature. So a tree can't be a tree without the dirt. Exactly. Without the sky, without the bugs crawling on it, without the birds using its branches, without the sun shining on its leaves. And that's a beautiful example that we do need each other. And it's our interactions with each other that mature us, that grow us, that really allow us to develop and to get to know ourselves. So one thing you mentioned was people making assumptions, thinking about other people. And unless we listen to them or unless we experience them, we don't really get to know who they are. And the activity of our mind is really amazing, because it's constantly categorizing. Yeah. Right. You said you can't compare something if there's just one. Yeah. And that's true. And the brilliance of our brain is that it allows us to choose. Are we choosing chocolate or vanilla? Are we choosing big or small? Yeah. What shirt are you wearing today? And that's a very powerful thing. The power to choose is amazing. Mm-hmm. But that ability in its negative aspect is judging other people without having information about them. And so if our cup is already full of ourselves, then we're not taking in information. We're just attributing characteristics on other people based on our experiences, which are limited to our own lifetime and aren't including other people's lifetime. So you're really putting pieces together for me. And I think that's amazing and beautiful. Thank you for that.
No, again, it's real recognizes real. It's that sense of you can't see it unless you actually understand it yourself. Yeah. And that's the aspect that's so powerful of, you said the word that's a hot word for me, discernment. Ooh. Huge and entirely necessary in this journey of realizing who you are is you have to be able to discern what you're not. That fundamental aspect of self-awareness could actually probably even be, there's so many avenues we could take this talk, but if we want to look at like the path that most people are on, it's self-absorption. It's living in those assumptions as if they're true, because you think about the self-absorption, you're self-absorbed. You are assuming that the judgments that you're having about someone are real. And not only that, you're living as if those imaginary thoughts that you're projecting onto someone, you live as if that's real. So not only are you perceiving them through that self-created lens, you're also carrying out yourself into the world and acting on that. And there's nothing more insane than that. But we think how many, seriously, like if you logically break this down, most people are clinically insane if you were to think about how they live their life. And that's one of the realizations that I had when I started to look at it in this, breaking it down on like assumptions, where I was just like, okay, well, if I'm going to look at this and see like, and question the thought, I could easily say, is this real? And the answer is no. It's my imagination. I don't know that. But what can I do with that to know? Well, I can ask, so then you clear the ground of assumption. And then when you hear the truth from someone like, oh, why'd you choose those shoes? And they tell you, you're like, oh, that's really cool. You keep the thought to yourself of, I thought you wore them because of this and this and this. Like you start to see that what happens in life is rarely, I would say like 99.99% of the time, it's not what your imagination thinks it's going to be. But how much do we live with that sliver of the 0.001% of actual imagination becoming reality? How much do we hold on to that 0.001% is real? And we then naturally, almost because again, we're all self-absorbed naturally with the society, that we then assume that the little sliver of truth that the imagination got right compared to the 99.99% it got wrong, we live as if every assumption and thought we have is real. So that's why it's probably the most difficult process, is really just that first step, like anything else, as above, so below. Look at anyone's process and change or transformation. The first step is always the hardest, because in the spiritual inner looking, the path of self-awareness doesn't begin until you really look at that self-absorbed being you were, and we're like, that ain't it. None of that's it. And that's terrifying for people to be like, wait, everything I've thought is wrong. And it's just like, no.
Identity crisis.
Exactly. Well, what have I been holding myself? What have I been attaching myself to? And that itself alone is like, okay, so what's the grandest assumption we make in this world? That we're the body. So, and this has been a theme that's been coming up more and more. And I love how this is how the flow of the conversation goes, because again, divine timing. One of the things that is a very, I guess you would say, impactful yet natural happening is that we are born in this body and we are within it before we can really interact with other people because of the cognitive abilities or the physical inabilities for years. We're stuck in this being, attached to our mind, attached to the thoughts. And as we're infants, we live in that pureness where it's a lot more of just the natural expression of life living and you just being and doing all in one beautiful harmony. But as we get older, those conditionings start to set in more and more. And this body that we were given, that we not so long ago had to learn how to control, because we're like, what is this thing? I got hands now,
this whoops,
or the blabber, like, oh, I see them talking like blah 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 blah. Why is my consciousness not connecting the things I'm trying to say to these people? We somehow seemingly forget that we are spirit embodied, and that again is the grandest assumption. But until we're willing to entertain, we'll never be able to experience. So for those that are really seeking out this truth, that may not be at that point where, they don't know who they are, but they're in that search, they want to know who they are. You have to let go of every assumption you've had about yourself. And for me, in this process of kind of unfoldment and peeling the layers back, it came back down to like the final assumption is that the fact that like I'm this body, the fact that I assume that I'm in this body, that I assume that this physical reality is it. What happens if I live in that knowing that it's not? What if I know that I'm more than my body because I leave my body, I drop away from my body, I enter sleep where I'm a different person and different being and all these different stuff, and then I can come back to this. I've had experiences where I've literally been looking at my body in like transitions from waking to sleeping state, where I'm like, okay, well, if I can see my body and it's just this bag of flesh, well, then what am I? So we have to go beyond that. So that's a pretty intense thing for people, because again, like you have to enter that path of courage to really walk your own walk. And I mean, how many people can say that they have the gusto within their own beingness and their own kind of self-knowing that they're like, yeah, I can do that. I can figure this out. We don't see that a lot. Most people give away their power to others, so it's a complicated question, because it's a very subjective question, and there's infinite expressions of the creator. So we all have our own paths of least resistance. But the most important part to remember here is, as I see it, all suffering stems from assumption. I used to actually kind of phrase it as assumptions lead to judgments and expectations lead to letdowns, but I've refined it as I've continued to like work on my book that's coming out. Is assumption is the root of suffering, because assumptions towards people are judgments. Assumptions towards life is an expectation. And it's these assumptions that we have, that we kind of think life should do this for us, or life should be this way for us, that we take ourselves away from realizing that no, you are life itself, and life is always trying to express itself and reveal your truth to you through whatever means necessary for you to get it. And that's the whole dance, is, we don't really figure out who we are until we really question the reality that we're living in. Like, is this it? So then you get to that question of like, well, who am I? Well, what is life? And that brings you to the pureness of what everything is and what you are. And you let go of all the things you're not. So it's a beautiful process of discernment. But when it comes down to it, most people can instantly increase their well-being and happiness by just letting go of assumptions. That if you were to look at every aspect of when you're unhappy and when you're not in your harmonious, balanced state, it's because you're assuming something, you've attached yourself or identified with that assumption. So
wow, mind-blowing, just mind-blowing. And assumptions is spoken about in Buddhism too.
Exactly.
Right? They're attachments. And those are the things that we use to identify us. And we'll talk a little bit more about identity when we come back from a short break.
Let's give a shout out to our sponsors. Thank you, We Are Historically, for making this show possible. Shop online at wearehistorically.com.
As a posture therapist, I'm qualified to pinpoint the cause of physical symptoms by realigning the body, and then it's the body that heals itself. When you are in a state of overwhelm, your mind is out of alignment with your values. As a coherence coach, I'm astute enough to identify the root causes and show you how to realign with what you value, and your mind can be whole. You can live by heart today.
Raise your vibration and energize your life with specialized Fibonacci tuning forks to deepen meditations and empower self-healing. Get your vibrational sound tools for personal enhancement at energybodytuners.com.
Welcome back to the Live by Heart Today show with my guest, Peter Lucas. And I just want to mention, you talked about self-absorption, and in my mind's eye, I saw a physical body absorbing. I saw the self absorbing itself as if I was eating, seeing, smelling only me, and that there was nothing else, right? Just being constantly like a sponge would soak up water. I was absorbing myself all the time. And that image was so eerie. Like, who am I to just be constantly in and around and about myself? That's me drooling in my cup and being full of spit and not having any of the other wonderful things in my glass to taste,
Exactly. Yeah.
I wanted to mention something. We were talking a little bit about identity crisis and we're spirits embodied. And two things. You had mentioned as above, so below, the whole cosmic, the idea of a big cosmos is mirrored in us, us in atoms. And I'm not sure if you know this, you've probably heard it, but the iron in our bloodstream, the iron that carries oxygen, those molecules came from stars. That iron was not native to this planet.
Yeah.
So we're made up of stardust, which, is another mind-blowing thing, but we wouldn't be possible without that, right? We wouldn't be breathing in and functioning in the way that we do without iron from other stars.
Yeah.
And you mentioned also us being a spirit embodied. And I'd like to give people watching a visualization. Most people know what an image of an atom looks like. And I've talked about this on prior shows, but it's worth mentioning again. An atom is, let's say, this much space. But the particles that you see, the neutrons, the protons, and the electrons, take up just a pencil dot of the amount of space that you see on a piece of paper. So what's the rest of what's making up that atom? If the particles, electrons and protons and neutrons are that small, the rest of the space is energy. That is our spirit being. That's how we are embodied spirits, because there's actually more spirit in us than there is particle matter.
Yeah.
And when we're constantly focused on the horizontal plane, the plane that is what we can touch and see, that self-absorption, right? I'm absorbing images, I'm absorbing smells and sights and sounds, and taking it into myself and making it me.
Yeah.
And what are we? We are a combination of all our experiences. And so when we meet other people, we're imposing those experiences on the other person instead of emptying out our glass and allowing ourselves to be filled with the experience of who they actually are, instead of our own experience of how we want them to be.
100%.
So you've really made some incredible remarks about how we are and who we are, and how we are and can be more actualized, more mature, more developed.
Yeah. I love it.
I love it too.
It's facts. It's facts.
Yeah. And love is so incredible. And at the foundation of this, and one thing I love is that you mentioned you have a book that's coming out. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I got a few different books coming out. The first one, yeah, so they're finishing up right now. One of them's pretty much done. It's more so just waiting for the divine timing of it. When I feel like it's right, when I feel like, when it's in the heart, when I know that like people are ready, then they'll be ready to come out. But the first one is kind of like a Awakening on the Throne. It's a regular kind of toilet book. It's one of those kind of gag gifts for people, but it's one of those self-help, really almost like a daily journal diary. And it's an insight a day to awaken, transform, and uplift your life. So you could take this book to the bathroom, read one of the quotes, read like the question to prompt, and then go take a shower or brush your teeth. And every day you'll have some type of little push or a nudge to take your inquiry to really break down those assumptions over a year. So some people, that's the pace that they need to live at, because some of these stripping away, your identity and beingness and the attachments is pretty terrifying if you're not really in that state of love or really seeking an escape from those things. But and the other two are kind of like a two-part series. One of them is kind of geared towards, and I gotta keep the IP a little secret because they're just so good. It's just they're such juicy names. The first one is essentially breaking down the light matrix we live in, the human experience from the fundamental level, and how to answer that question that you asked me earlier for this episode is, how do you figure out who you are? Like, what is liberation? What is enlightenment? And it's trying to bring the blending of East and West of what spirituality has always intended to be. And it's this realization that, it's the blending of science and spirit. It's the realization that it's the entirety of this experience. But the last part of that first book is really bringing you to the point of gaining all the tools to figure it out yourself, to learn the different tips of focus, of meditation, of manifestation. And then the second book is kind of a post-awakening book, because there are so many pieces of literature out there that are really guiding people to awakening, unfoldment, healing, transformation, but none of them really tell you how to live after that. So the other one is kind of the second part to something that I mentioned earlier, where it's like, we're really tasked with life with like, who are you and what are you? Like, who and what are you is like the fundamental starting point. And until you figure those things out, nothing else can really begin from there, because you can't really live out your truth and be the gift to the world as you were intended to be without that. So the second book is essentially the latter. It's really, you figured it out. You practice stuff in the first book. You're at this point of like self-realization or self-awareness or self-liberation, whatever you want to call it. And you're now trying to get your feet right, because when you awaken and you let go of these mass assumptions, you're almost in this baby Buddhahood, as I like to call it, where you're still learning what it means to be you without the assumptions. Because again, that law of inertia comes into play. You have to, the simplest way to stop those old cycles is by disengaging with them, is by just not feeding them anymore. But some of them still have their energy that comes back around until you really let it go. So it's reminding you and giving you almost the encouragement to keep your search going and to really how to bring out the fullness of yourself. So it's that next level of healing, of harmonization, of really bringing out the divine masculine and feminine within you to really like live that fully liberated life and just enjoy the play. So yeah, if you like the metaphors and things that I'm putting down, you guys are going to like the books, because
awesome.
Yeah, it comes with pictures and different diagrams and things. But the main reason why those came to be was really like, not many people understand that everything in this world is love. And because of that, they don't really know how to fully love themselves.
Yeah.
And that's really the ultimate way I could pitch the books, is really it's just a loving guide of healing your heart and liberating your heart and living through the heart. So that's why I'm like, yeah, I love this show. We vibe all day, because it's that same heart coherence that's necessary in like the mantra that I've been living out of Live Love, where that is probably the simplest way to break down everything we've talked about in this show and the previous one. No assumptions, living by that truth, living in the knowing of the heart, allowing yourself to simply be and not get caught up in the doing all the time, to realize that this is an ethereal dance, that this is all creation of the creator, that, each of us are divine. It's that Live Love is that instant root and anchor back to that, allow everything to be. And what is the most loving thing we can do? If we want to look at contraction and relaxation, we can say that, fear or things of otherness or separation cause us to contract. We close off, we protect. But what is love? What love is fully opening up. Love is just being inclusive, like, come on in, we're not there, it's tensionless, right? So for me, Live Love takes this whole concept of not living in assumptions even further, because what are assumptions? It's us closing off the reality of what is versus us being open and being loving. So that's where when you said it was just like, we're not projecting our own past onto other people. It's like, yeah, because that's like the grandest way to take yourself out of reality, is to assume that you know something about someone or something else. Like the only thing we're ever tasked to know is ourselves. That's it. That's the only thing we can know in truth. But
you mentioned Live Love, and that's a beautiful thing. And I want to explain a little bit from a perspective that I've begun to understand. And that is, I've been experiencing more Christian circles. I've chosen to go to church and follow, biblical principles. And that's by choice. And what I'm realizing is, for example, there's a verse, 1 John 4:8, that says, "He who does not love does not know God, because God is love."
100%.
Now, that seems sort of like a pat thing to say, oh, God is love, because you hear about it, right? But when you think about the truth of it, so love as a particular experience, it's a particular vibration. We mentioned the atoms have particles that are much smaller than the actual energy of the atom. So if you imagine yourself in a loving situation where you're loving on a child or you're loving your spouse, right? Like wedding days are full of love. Things like that. Put yourself in the spirit of something where you've experienced profound love. And in that moment, your nervous system is calm. In that moment, your eyes are taking in. I like to tell people to go back to that infatuation stage, when you're infatuated with someone, because you're developing love and you're open. You're sensing, you're feeling, you're smelling, and you're aware of all of these things, which is noticing lots of minute details. And that is the spirit of God because you're calm and you're aware of everything. And that's how God can be omnipresent.
Yeah.
That's how God can be love. And contrast that with a moment when you were afraid. And what's your nervous system doing? Your nervous system is shaken up. It's closed. Your eyes are very narrow, trying to see and perceive what the threat is.
Yeah.
Your mouth is getting dry. You're no longer digesting, right? Your heart rate is high. Your respiration is preparing you for all these other things. And of course, you're going to be closed off to everything except determining what the threat is so that you can save your physical body. So these are the experiences of life and the experiences of spirit.
Yeah.
So God as being love, as open, as generous, as more life, which is different than fear and trembling and being closed. And I'd like people to understand that these are physical things that have spiritual concepts, that have real spiritual understandings. And it's as basic as that. Yeah. We're either in love or we're in stress or fear. Yeah. And you can't be doing both at the same time.
And the funny thing about this too is, I think a lot of people, their instant kind of recoiling moment or tension would arise with even just this concept of God is love. And thinking that's super cliche, but not understanding the actual mechanics of love. Again, when you look at like, okay, well, if God is, a lot of people I hear say, if God is real, why would he allow this and this and this? And numerous assumptions on that front, first off, where it's like, assuming God has a sexuality, or like a sex or a gender, considering it made everything, it's one of those things where you have to look at it in the sense of, when we look at God, we have to see that as above, so below. And really, to apply this essence, look at children and look at, especially for parents, your child will never learn how to properly crawl, bend, and walk if you try to do it for them. If we're truly tasked to understand ourselves in this sense of oneness with the Creator, what better way to give them the opportunity than by letting them grow up just like how we raise children and letting them learn how to walk. We are given this playground, this divine playground, you could say, as a gift. And therefore we were given the free will, that ability to choose, discernment. And our own divine energy is being, I guess you would say, abused or misused in all the avenues that people complain about, that they blame God for. But again, it comes back to assumption. Like, what's the grandest assumption is to choose that God is micromanaging everything and everyone. Like, do you enjoy that? Do you think God would enjoy that? Like, don't you think there's a lot going on that, it wouldn't want to micromanage everyone's little business?
Right.
It can't. That's the beauty of Source, is that we were given the love to really be who we are. And just as a parent, sometimes a child may come to a point of animosity or resentment, and they may not be aligned with the parent at a point in time. We're going through that natural process ourselves as beings and as people. We're coming back into that understanding. And for me, it's funny how the word discernment always pops out, because I feel like it's the discernment that leads us to this point of realization. And after the realizations arise of like who you are, what life is, it's that opportunity to really devote yourself to that truth. And devotion becomes a huge play, because how do we devote ourselves to the grand gift and beauty that this life is? It's through what I like to call praise. And how I define praise is gratitude through action. So when we live in that gratitude through action, when we live in that love and reverence for life and experience, we're naturally aligning ourselves with that love harmony. And when we begin to see that we're not just, the end of this physical body, that there's more beyond this life and experience, that others are also emulating that same divine back onto me, it becomes this next level understanding of love, where it's like, oh my gosh, like loving myself fully is loving others, and loving others is loving myself. Loving experience is just allowing it to unfold, and whatever life is going to, show me in this divine film, I'm going to just watch and allow the flow to take over, and just sit back internally and just eat the popcorn and just wait for the magic. Because it's actually funny, if we look at if you want to bring the previous episode to this one full circle on how to practice the flow in one of the subtleties that we assume, that we just overlook. And it's, how do we watch a movie? Do you watch a movie and, and I'll rephrase that. How do you watch a really, really good movie? Because you can watch a B-rated movie or whatever. You can talk your whole way through it. But when you're watching a really good movie, a really intense piece of art, you get drawn into it.
Yes.
You cry with the characters, you laugh with the characters, you root for the hero, you cheer against the villain.
Yes.
You're so immersed in the play, and the moment it's over, just like, oh, it's over. But you gave yourself up. You loved your experience enough just to be open to perceive. If people were to live life like that, to not assume, to live in this experience as if you're watching a movie and just let your heart guide you, which it's always trying to do. You don't need to do anything.
Yeah.
Life will be so much more magical, and you'll be able to experientially know what you've been doing wrong, or what you've been doing that's not you, or disingenuine to your truth. And then when you start to realize that, it's just a process of refinement. But it's that discernment can lead you to the devotion if you, again, do it all in love. Like, try to figure things out in love. Try to rephrase the things you get to do each day versus I have to do this. Approaching everything in this light of love and keeping that at the forefront of your mind will not only help you carry out that love in the world, but it'll help you see more of it. And that's the real essence of it. So live love is like a grand statement or mantra that comprises so much of every spiritual teaching we could really think of. And it's just, that's all we're tasked to do, is once we figure stuff out, is just live the love that's there. And it's the love for source, yourself, all, and just the gift that this eternal, ever unfolding now is, right?
Live by heart. And Christ was asked about the greatest commandments. We'll end with this.
Ooh, I like it.
And what did he say? In the New Testament, he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Right? That's the first one. And the second one he said was, love others as you love yourself.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Peter Lucas. I'm so happy you were able to join me today. And thank you to everyone who was watching. Please let us know if you're with us. We want to hear from you. And we'd love for you to tell us what's on your heart by leaving us a comment. For more information, please go to livebyhearttoday.com. Like and follow this page and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our programs, which happen every Thursday at 4:44 Pacific time. A big thanks for Peter's big heart. And from our hearts to yours, we're connecting our body and soul because we live by heart today.
And that concludes this portion of Live by Heart Today.
And thank you to our sponsors for making the show possible. Hooray! Thank you, We Are Historically, for your conscious human apparel. Shop online at wearehistorically.com.
Hi, I'm Darius Wilrich. I instruct an online video course that teaches anyone how to play jazz piano like a pro with my proven step-by-step system that makes it simple to learn. Jazz Piano Pro Essentials. Enroll today at jazzpianopro.com and download my free quick start guide.
Thank you for joining us. Have a happy always. View more episodes on our website.
That flowed.
Yeah, Peter's great.
You're to stop me. I'll ramble forever.
It's all good. It's all good.